I want to be precise about something before I start. I am not a superstitious man. I have never been. I grew up in a household where the only things that mattered were the things you could prove. And I carried that disposition into medicine, into my career, into every decision I made across 31 years of practicing as a physician. My colleagues would describe me as methodical. My patients, I think, would describe me as direct. Neither word is a complaint. Both words are accurate. I say this because what I'm about to tell you requires a witness who cannot be dismissed as credulous. It requires someone who spent 14 years in one of the most empirically brutal environments that exists, a maximum security correctional facility, and who maintained, through all of it, the professional posture of a scientist in a laboratory, because that is what the work demanded, and that is who I am. I am telling you this anyway, despite who I am, because of who I am. My name is Dr. Calvin Marsh. I served as the primary care physician at Hargrove Correctional Institution in rural Georgia from 2004 to 2018, 14 years. Hargrove was a maximum security facility housing approximately 1,800 inmates at any given time, with a population that included a significant number of men serving life sentences and a smaller number on death row. My medical unit was a 12-bed infirmary attached to the main building, staffed by myself, 2 rotating nurses, and a part-time psychiatrist who came in on Tuesdays and Thursdays. The work was not glamorous. It was not the medicine I had imagined when I was in medical school, and I want to be honest about that. Nobody who goes to medical school imagines ending up as a prison doctor. It happens by a series of smaller decisions, each reasonable in isolation, and then one day you are driving through a checkpoint gate at 6 in the morning with a security badge around your neck and a set of keys that weigh more than your stethoscope, and you are a prison doctor. But it was real medicine. I want to be clear about that too. The men in my infirmary were men. They were not abstractions or statistics or the sum of their crimes. They were bodies with conditions and histories and the full range of pathology that accumulates in a population of aging men who have lived the kinds of lives that end in maximum security correctional facilities. Hypertension, diabetes, COPD, end-stage renal disease, hepatitis C in numbers that would alarm you. HIV, cancer discovered too late because the years before incarceration had not included regular primary care. I treated all of it. I treated it the same way I would have treated it anywhere. The work had a rhythm. Everything in a prison has a rhythm. The counts, the meals, the lockdowns, the shift changes, the particular sounds of a facility that never fully sleeps. The medical unit had its own rhythm inside that larger rhythm, and I learned it the way you learn anything you live inside of for long enough. It was inside that rhythm, in my 3rd year at Hargrove, that I first noticed Elias Cobb. Elias was 53 years old when I met him. He was serving a life sentence for a crime I will not specify because it is not relevant to what I am telling you, and because in 14 years I made a practice of separating the medical from the criminal in my own mind, as cleanly as I could, because the alternative was to become someone who practiced medicine differently based on what a man had done, and I refused to do that. He was a thin man, Elias. Thin in the way of someone who had always been thin, not the thinness of illness, though he had his conditions, managed hypertension, early stage type 2 diabetes, the arthritis that comes from a lifetime of physical labor. He had been at Hargrove for 11 years by the time I arrived, and he had the particular quality of long-term inmates. A stillness, an economy of movement and expression, an absence of the performative anxiety that newer inmates carried. He was not threatening. He was not warm. He was present in the precise and minimal way of someone who has learned to be exactly where he is and nowhere else. He came to the medical unit for his regular appointments without complaint and without the manipulation that some inmates attempted. The exaggerated symptoms, the requests for medications they didn't need, the attempts to extend time outside their housing units. Elias came in, answered my questions accurately, took his medications without argument, and left. He was, from a purely medical management standpoint, among my easiest patients. I did not know anything about the other thing until the morning of March the 9th in my 3rd year at Hargrove. I had admitted a man named Gerald Simmons to the infirmary the previous night. Gerald was 67 years old, serving year 19 of a life sentence, and he had been brought in with what appeared to be a significant cardiac event: chest pain, diaphoresis, the clinical picture of an acute MI. We had stabilized him, started him on the appropriate medications, arranged for transfer to the county hospital for further evaluation. Gerald was conscious, oriented, and while he was clearly unwell, his vitals had stabilized overnight and the transfer was scheduled for that afternoon. Elias Cobb was in the infirmary that morning for a routine blood draw. He came in at 8:15, sat down in the chair outside the lab room, and waited. Standard routine. I was reviewing Gerald's chart at the nursing station when I happened to look up. Elias was not looking at me. He was looking at the closed door of the room where Gerald was being monitored. He was looking at it the way you look at something that requires your complete attention. Still, focused, with the quality of concentration you give to something important. And then he turned his head very slightly and he looked at me, and he said, in the tone of someone stating a verifiable fact, "He's going to go at 11:47. I looked at him. "Gerald," he said, clarifying, as if I might not know who he was referring to. "This morning, 11:47. I am a physician. I have been trained to respond to clinical information and to set aside everything that is not clinical information." I set it aside. I noted it with the part of my brain that files things away, and I continued reviewing Gerald's chart. Gerald Simmons died at 11:47 that morning. Massive cardiac event, irreversible, despite full resuscitation efforts. The transfer had not yet been arranged. The county hospital had been delayed in confirming the transport, as often happened. And he was in the infirmary when it happened. 11:47. I stood in the room after we called it, and I thought about what Elias had said, and I did what scientists do when they encounter an anomalous data point. I filed it. Single data point. Coincidence. Meaningful patterns require more than one occurrence. I got more than one occurrence. I need to tell you about the next two before I tell you about what happened after, because the pattern is the thing, and the pattern takes time to see. 6 weeks after Gerald Simmons died, a man named Raymond Torres was brought into the infirmary. Raymond was 41 years old, a relatively recent arrival at Hargrove, and he was brought in because he had collapsed in the yard. Witnesses said he had simply stopped walking mid-stride and gone down, no apparent warning. When we evaluated him, he was conscious but confused, with what appeared to be a significant neurological event in progress. I suspected stroke and initiated the emergency protocol. Elias was in the infirmary that day for a wound check, a minor laceration on his forearm from a work assignment. He was seated in the waiting area when they brought Raymond in, and he watched the activity with that particular stillness of his. And I saw him watching, and something in the back of my mind that had been filing things made a quiet note. After the immediate activity settled and Raymond was stabilized in a bed, I came out to the waiting area and I looked at Elias and I did not say anything. I just looked at him. He looked back at me for a moment. Then he said, "Tomorrow, 6:12 in the morning." Raymond Torres died at 6:13 the following morning. The official time of death was 6:13 because that is when his heart monitor flatlined, and that is when the nurse on duty called it. Whether the actual moment was 6:12 or 6:13 depends on the precision of the equipment and the reaction time of a nurse at 6 in the morning. And I have thought about that 1-minute discrepancy many times, and I have decided it does not matter. The third time was a man named Winston Bell. Winston was 74 years old, in poor health, in the general way of a man of that age, who had spent decades in a correctional facility. He had been in and out of the infirmary for 2 years with a constellation of conditions: CHF, COPD, chronic kidney disease stage 4, that made his overall prognosis clearly limited, though he was not in what I would describe as imminent terminal decline when he was admitted for what appeared to be an acute exacerbation of his heart failure. I did not wait for Elias to volunteer the information this time. I requested that he be brought to the medical unit for a vitamin B12 injection that he was due for. A legitimate medical reason, nothing that would raise questions with the correctional staff. And when he sat down across from me, I said, "Winston Bell is in the infirmary." Elias looked at me for a moment. Then he said, "Sunday, 3 in the afternoon, more or less. More or less, I repeated. The exact time is harder with him, Elias said. He's been close for a while. Sometimes when someone's been that close for a long time, the exact time is harder. Winston Bell died on Sunday at 2:58 in the afternoon. I sat in my office for a long time after Winston died, and I thought about what I was holding. 3 patients, 3 times, precise to the minute in 2 cases, within 2 minutes in the third, and Elias himself had flagged that the third would be harder. I was holding something that had no framework, no category, no peer-reviewed home. I started keeping records, not official records, nothing in the medical charts, nothing that would survive a litigation or review board, a personal notebook kept in the locked drawer of my desk, in which I recorded dates and times and what Elias had said and what had happened. Over the following 11 years, I filled that notebook and 2 more. I want to tell you what the notebooks contain, because the scope of it is the part that still, even now, even after all of it, still refuses to settle into anything I can call ordinary. Elias Cobb predicted the deaths of 27 patients during my tenure at Hargrove Correctional Institution. 27. Not all of them were infirmary patients. Some were men who died in their housing units, in the yard, in transit. Some were men I had not anticipated losing. Men who were not critically ill by any measure I had available, whose deaths arrived as surprises to everyone at the facility, except, apparently, Elias. His accuracy was total, not approximate, not mostly correct, total. In 27 cases, across 11 years, he was wrong about the time by more than 15 minutes on 3 occasions. Every other prediction was within a quarter hour of the actual time of death, and the majority were exact to within minutes. He did not always volunteer the information. Mostly he did not. In the early years, before I had established any kind of understanding with him, he said nothing unless I created an opportunity for him to speak privately with me. After the first year of my keeping the notebook, I began meeting with him monthly. I structured it as a wellness check, which was medically legitimate given his conditions. And during those meetings, I would tell him who was in the infirmary, and he would sometimes tell me what he knew, and sometimes say nothing. When he said nothing, it meant the person would recover. In 11 years, he was wrong about that 0 times. I asked him once, in the second year of our monthly meetings, when I had enough entries in the notebook to have stopped questioning whether the pattern was real and had started questioning what the pattern meant. I asked him how long he had known. He thought about it for a moment. Then he said, "Since I was about 12. "What happened when you were 12? I asked. "My grandmother," he said. "She was sick, but the doctors said she had time. I was sitting with her one afternoon and I knew. The way you know when it's about to rain. Not a thought, just a knowing. I knew it was going to be that evening at about 8 o'clock. He paused. It was 7:53. I've been off by more since then. I think I was more open when I was young. "Have you always been able to control it?" I asked. "Whether you received the information?" He looked at me with an expression I found difficult to categorize. Not quite amusement, not quite sadness. "I never receive it about people who are going to live," he said. "Only about people who aren't. I can't turn it off. I've tried." He looked at his hands. "It comes whether I want it or not. Sometimes about people I've never met. A new arrival and I'll just know, first time I see them in the yard, that they won't make it past spring." "Does it disturb you?" I asked. He thought about that for a long time, long enough that I thought he wasn't going to answer. Then he said, "For a long time it did. When I was young, I thought I was causing it. I thought knowing meant I was responsible. It took me a long time to understand that I was just receiving a signal, like a radio. The radio doesn't cause the music." I wrote that in the notebook. The radio doesn't cause the music. It is the most precise description of what he was describing that I can imagine. And I have thought about it many times in the years since I left Hargrove. I need to tell you about the case that made me finally understand what I was dealing with. His name was Officer Daniel Pruitt. He was a correctional officer, not an inmate, not a medical patient, a member of the staff. He was 44 years old in what appeared to be good health, assigned to the housing unit that Elias was in. He and Elias had a civil working relationship, as far as I could observe, not friendly but functional. the professional neutrality that the better officers maintained with the long-term inmates who posed no behavioral problems? In January of my 9th year at Hargrove, Elias asked to see me outside of our scheduled meeting. The nursing staff brought the request to me as a medical complaint. He had cited chest pain, which got him moved to the infirmary for evaluation. His EKG was normal. His vitals were normal. He had no chest pain. When the nurse left us alone, he looked at me and he said, "I need to tell you something about one of the officers." I looked at him. "Pruitt," he said. "Daniel Pruitt, Housing Unit C." "He's not a patient," I said. The words came out automatically, the procedural response. "He's going to be," Elias said. "Thursday. He'll come in Thursday morning. He won't leave." I sat with that information for a moment. Then I said, "What time?" 4 in the afternoon, Elias said, give or take. I did something that I have questioned since, and that I would do again. On Wednesday morning, I found a reason to stop by Housing Unit C during my rounds. I did occasional, brief wellness checks of staff at the request of the administration, and I used that protocol as a cover. I found Officer Pruitt and I engaged him in conversation about his health. He was dismissive in the way of healthy middle-aged men who do not think about their health. He was fine. He felt fine. He didn't need a checkup. I asked him as casually as I could when he had last had an EKG. He said he couldn't remember. I told him I was doing a staff cardiac screening. I invented this on the spot, and I am not proud of that, but I am not ashamed of it either. And I asked him if he would come by the medical unit that afternoon for a quick baseline. He came by. His resting EKG showed a finding that I will not elaborate on for medical privacy reasons, but that warranted immediate follow-up. I told him so, clearly and without minimizing it. I told him he needed to go to the emergency department that day, not the following week, not after his shift ended. That day. He went. The cardiac catheterization performed at the county hospital that evening found a 90% occlusion of his left anterior descending artery, the LAD, the widowmaker. He went directly from the cath lab to the operating room for bypass surgery. He did not come into my infirmary on Thursday. He did not die on Thursday. He is alive. I know this because I have kept loose track of people who mattered in those 14 years, and Daniel Pruitt is among them. He retired from corrections 3 years after his surgery, and as of the last information I have, he is alive and well. I went to Elias the following week. I sat down across from him, and I told him what had happened, and I watched his face. He was quiet for a long time. Then he said, "That's the first time." "The first time what?" I asked. "The first time it's been wrong," he said. He said it with an expression I could not read. Not relief, not satisfaction, not quite either of those things. Something more complicated. Something that looked like a man revising a belief he had held for 40 years. "Or the first time it was right," I said, "and we changed the outcome." He looked at me for a long time. "Do you think that's possible?" he asked. "I don't know," I said, "but I think we have to act as if it is. Otherwise, what's the point of knowing?" He nodded slowly. He looked at his hands again the way he did when he was processing something that required more than words. "The radio doesn't cause the music?" I said. "No," he said, "but maybe sometime someone can change the station." I retired from Hargrove Correctional Institution in 2018. Elias Cobb remains incarcerated there, as far as I know, now 67 years old, serving the remainder of a life sentence. I think about him with some frequency. I think about the 27 entries in 3 notebooks. I think about Daniel Pruitt, who should have died on a Thursday afternoon in January and did not, who is presumably somewhere right now in retirement. Living years he almost certainly does not know he almost did not have. I think about what Elias said. The radio doesn't cause the music. And I think about what I said in response. And I think about whether it is true that sometimes someone can change the station. I do not know if it is true. I know that it happened once, that we change one outcome, that one man is alive whose death Elias had perceived as certain. I do not know if it was the intervention or some other variable or some limitation in the signal that Elias received about people who were not inmates in his facility. What I know is this: I spent 14 years as a prison doctor, and for 11 of those years, I sat across from a thin man with arthritis and managed hypertension, and a thing he had lived with since he was 12 years old and had no language for. And I wrote down what he told me in 3 notebooks, and it was right every time except once. And the exception happened because we tried to make it happen. I do not have a framework for that. I have stopped looking for one. I have 3 notebooks in a locked box in my study. I have the memory of 27 men who died on the days and at the times that Elias told me they would. I have the memory of one man who did not. And I have the particular quality of silence that settled over Elias Cobb's face when I told him that his signal had been wrong for the first time in 40 years, and the way he looked at his hands and the thing he said about the station. Maybe sometimes someone can change the station. I believe that. I did not believe it before Hargrove. I believe it now. It cost me 14 years and 3 notebooks, and the comfortable certainty of a man who thought that the things that mattered were only the things he could prove. I think that was a fair price.